so much for this wonderful opportunity to be with you and share a few words and open up this prestigious panel. Latin America's recovery must be driven by infrastructure, innovation, and investment in people. Miami has served as an economic and political hub for Latin America's development. We welcome your collaboration and cooperation for driving growth throughout the Americas. This is an opportunity to build a new alliance for progress, un nuevo alianza para el progreso. We can only accomplish this by expanding free trade for goods and services. Miami plays a central role, but we need to work with our national governments to ensure that free trade deals are efficient and effective and address issues like the environment, workforce development, high-value immigration, human trafficking, and the reduction of transaction costs for businesses across industries. Federal assistance is required to complement and to expand these programs in order to meet the level of need we're seeing as a result of the COVID pandemic. Miami's strong ties to the international business community, especially in Latin America and the Caribbean, haven't just fueled our growth, they have paved a pathway for every Miamian while building a resilient city. We need to focus on hard infrastructure. Our economy and our recovery needs investment in climate adaptive infrastructure that is long-lasting and resilient. We share in the same challenges and we can share in the same successes. This is crucial not only to not only the city of Miami's future, but every city facing economic downturn, creating opportunities for city residents and redeveloping communities suffering from persistent poverty, underinvestment, and rapid gentrification. In order to spur economic revitalization from local level, cities must invest into their communities, which the city of Miami aims to achieve through, number one, skilled training, mentorship, licensing, and certification. Secondly, equipment grants for small design and construction firms. Third, construction and development business incubators. Fourth, community benefit agreements with local hiring preferences. And lastly, a local hiring information and assistance network. Expanding affordable housing is necessary for enhancing, protecting, and preserving the neighborhoods that make Miami the most diverse and dynamic city in North America. Miami is actively seeking to integrate climate adaptive technology as well as public health resilience through a package of policy reforms that we call Miami Forever. It started with the Miami Forever bond, which laid the fiscal foundation for these investments and leveraged our economic resources. Miami Forever builds on this with policies and programs that create the alternatives and incentives to our businesses and residents to transition to a more productive, more sustainable, and more resilient future across all levels of government and activity. The Miami Forever bond is a convergence of ecological and economical development. It's no longer a choice between the environment and the economy. The environment is the economy. We need to focus on soft infrastructure, investment in people, workforce development, affordable housing, and human development. People are the most important asset of our economic recovery and expansion. We need to focus on innovation. Miami is, we hope it to be, the Silicon Valley of Latin America. We have high-value residents from all over Latin America who leverage technology in Miami to grow our economy and that of Latin America. We understand that investment drives opportunity in ways that positively impact our residents' lives, and it's showing in the results. Prior to the pandemic, Miami was #1 in job growth in the country, according to CityLab. From 2010 to 2014, Miami was one of 5 metro areas, along with New York, LA, Houston, and Dallas, that accounted for 50% of all startups in the United States, according to the Economic Innovation Group. South Florida ranked #1 in startup activity in the US in 2017, according to the Kaufman Index. Miami's economy is deeply intertwined with that of Latin America, meaning that the economic revival and expansion of Miami is contingent on the effective revitalization of our neighbors to the south. And I would just finish by saying that we are geo-positioned in a place where we can help integrate markets from North America, Canada, Mexico, South America, Europe, Asia. And so we, as Miami, consider ourselves a gateway to the entire country and to the entire world. And certainly Latin America is an enormous part of the connections that we continue to strive to make our city the most wonderful city on the planet.
Mayor Suarez, thank you so much. It's a great honor to have you here, the mayor of Miami. And, just listening to you is inspiring. At the same time, there are a lot of challenges that we have as a region, but definitely Miami is a wonderful gateway for this strong relationship between the United States and the Americas, and to see how we can evolve to the next phase. And I guess these pandemics should put us to move onto those kind of ideas and think widely and wisely. So thank you so much, Mr. Mayor, and it's an honor to have you here. Well,
Thank
for
you.
me, it's an honor today to be in this Concordia annual summit. We were expected to be in New York, as happens every year. And unfortunately, this year, here we are, using technology, using connectivity, using iPads, using new systems to connect in an event that usually goes next to the United Nations General Assembly, the famous UNGA, where we are supposed to worldwide be putting our eyes. But now all world leaders and actually all different business people and civil society leaders are now understanding that we need to protect ourselves, protect our people, reduce contagion chances, and somehow think wisely and adapt to what reality is bringing to us. So for me, it's a great honor to be in this strategic dialogue on regional response and economic recovery in the Americas. And let me first of all thank my good friend Matt Swift and my good friend Nick Logothetis. They are the Concordia CEO and founders. And somehow I really encourage them to continue to move forward because, some people thought that because of the pandemic, a meeting like this was going to be canceled. But here we are. And we're here because, they're pushing hard and that's good news. Let me start by introducing a little bit of what has happened in economics. But I know we're going to have a wonderful panel and very wonderful people that will get us into details. But let me remind you that the pandemic is a worldwide event. And unfortunately, it's hitting hard and probably creating the worst ever economic recession that is known. Of course, it has been life-threatening. Just to give you the number in my own country, we are around 23,000 deaths already. But when you look these numbers all around the world, we're getting above 700,000 people, which is very dramatic and very worrisome, which implies probably nobody was prepared for this. Probably experts were telling us you're going to have a pandemic, but we never thought how to prepare for it. And the consequences are here. Of course, lockdowns were the mostly used policy, especially at the beginning. Somehow, authorities needed to be responsible. And in many of our countries, they just closed down the life and the economy. Of course, in those countries in which we were a little bit more disciplined, probably the consequences were positive in terms of less contagion, less deaths. But anyhow, it had a real effect on the economy. The world economy, according to IMF, is estimated to contract by the year 2020 in minus 8%. And that even could be a positive scenario. Latin America, after Europe, is the area of the world in which contraction is the highest. In Europe, it is expected, according to IMF numbers, to be minus 10%. In Latin America, we're expecting minus 9%. But what is worse is recovery rate. While most of the world is expected to recover to levels above 4 to 5% in the year 2021, and even Europe moving to levels of 5%, Latin America is only expected to recover at a rate of 3%, which is quite low. And frankly speaking, it not even recovers part of what was lost. Then when you move into this onto two key indicators for a region like Latin America, poverty and unemployment, the numbers are dramatic. Poverty, according to the UN Economic Commission is expected to have some like 50 million people in poverty. And is expected to double the number of people unemployed from 24 million people to around 45 million people. This is very dramatic. In Latin America, unfortunately, unemployment usually comes together with political turmoils. So populism is happening. And we're getting close to election season. And in many countries, there's no doubt that this reality, both in the economy, in jobs, and of course, in poverty, which creates worries along the people, inequality. Also the idea that there's higher inequality than thought, not only because pandemic creates it, but because it has brought the evidence that, for instance, connectivity is very strong in certain levels of the region for high level income people. But those who are in mid to low income levels are not necessarily having the levels of connectivity that allows them to do home office or even home education, which is very dramatic if you put it in perspective. Well, I just wanted to bring this set of ideas to think about this conversation. And now let me introduce this wonderful panel that we have today. I think we couldn't be with better people, with smarter people, and with more influential people for the years to come in our region. Let me start by introducing Her Excellency, Rosalía Arteaga. She's a former president of Ecuador, and actually she currently is the CEO of FIDAL Foundation. Also, we have with us Alicia Bárcena, someone that I will say is very important at this moment for the recovery of our region. She's the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. We also have Luc Lapointe. He's the CEO and founder of the BC Labs. He will later describe this very well and will explain us why this is so important. We also have with us Richard Mayfield, the Executive Vice President and Regional CEO for Mexico and Central America, Canada, and the UK of Walmart, which is very important for regional economy. We also have my very good friend, David Smolansky. David is from our very appreciated and brotherhood of Venezuela. You know, he's the Secretary General Envoy for Venezuela Migration and Refugee Crisis at the OAS. And finally, I have my good friend and colleague from Bogota, Nicolas Uribe Rueda. He's the Executive President of the Chamber of Commerce of Bogota and actually a former member of Colombian Congress. So as you see, we have a wonderful set of people, and I think we can have a real wonderful strategic dialogue, a good conversation. So let's move on, and let me start by, asking in this first subject, what are the most pressing issues to address? What are we supposed to be doing right now? And I think I should take the advantage of having Alicia here, because Alicia is somehow thinking every day, every hour of her life right now, what to do next? What are the policies that we need for the region? So Alicia, let me start with you.
Thank you so much, Juan Carlos. It's really a privilege and honor to be here today. And yes, indeed, I will be happy to contribute as much as we can. We have done several reports on what's happening in the region. And let me just say at the very outset that before COVID-19, already Latin America and the Caribbean were confronting severe structural challenges and gaps: inequality, productivity, very low productivity, restricted fiscal space, high indebtedness. So we were already in certain sense in trouble, let's say. So when the pandemics hit, and also I want to say something, because you talk about populism, and I think it's important to say that in 2019, there was a wave of protests all along the region. And it was revealing the discontent and the frustration, I would say, with increasing inequalities. I think that was really the problem. So COVID-19 magnified these fragilities and put together, as you very well said, we estimated this contraction of minus 9.1, the worst recession in history. Unemployment will reach 44 million people. And that's something we need to look into, because here we have the private sector. And one of the things that governments want to put priority is on how do we create jobs. And this is going to be central. It's not only how do we invest, but how do we create jobs? Because the poverty rate, and I have bad news here, is going to put more people into poverty, 45 million people. So we're going to have 231 million people in poverty if we don't do something urgently. And 96 of those will be on extreme poverty. And that is also facing a risk of undernutrition to these people. Now, talking about economics, which I think the private sector will be very interested in, is the contraction of exports in our region is minus 23%. And the bad news, and I think this is what we need to reorient, is that regional trade or intra-regional trade has been in bad shape as well. So we need to reinforce that. And now that the free trade agreement between the US and Mexico and Canada has been signed, and the new geographic economics that is going to emerge from these pandemics, because what we're going to have is we're going to have a strong region in Asia Pacific, a strong region in North America, a strong region in Europe. Each one of them is looking for resilience rather than efficiency. Many companies are being reshored, are being relocated. So we need to rethink how this region needs to go into this direction. The global foreign direct investment flows are going to decrease between 30 and 40% compared to 2009. And this is going to be a loss of value of $1 trillion for the first time since 2005. So this fall is larger than the one experienced, for example, in the global financial crisis. So, and the projections then are quite negative. Now, how is this impacting our region? 2.7 million formal firms are going to be forced to close. And this is already happening in a way. And this is going to drive many million people out of formal jobs. Now, informality is a separate question. Informality in our region is up to 54%. I mean, going from 70% in Peru to, I would say, 30% in Chile, probably 13% in Uruguay, but it's very high. So, but the formal firms are going to close, and the most affected sectors are going to be services, tourism. Tourism is going to have a big impact, as we know. It's going to fall very, very hard. And the women are going to be very highly hit. 78% of the employed women belong to the informal sector. And in the health sector, for example, 73% are women of the employed in the health sector. So in addition, with the closure of schools, social isolation, we have an extra burden on women that is on the domestic jobs that are many times unpaid. And finally, to finalize the diagnosis, which you gave at the beginning, but I want to add one figure that I think is extremely important, is that 40 million households do not have digital connectivity in our region. This is important, very important, because today we know that digital connectivity is essential to do teleworking, teleeducation. And today we have 46% of children between 5 and 12 years that are not connected to internet. So these children are going to be left behind in education. And this is something we really need to look into, because 32 million children are effectively excluded from education. Now, from the fiscal and the monetary perspective, I think it has been a very interesting period in which we have seen fiscal and monetary policies as never before in our region, really, and in the world, actually. So these fiscal, I would say, packages have been very important to face the pandemics. We have seen that governments from our region have reacted more or less with 5% of GDP on fiscal efforts, very important, and 10% on credit guarantees for payroll support, for grants to businesses, for unemployment benefits, for public assessment, for public assistance for those on the informal sector. and other forms of relief, for example, utility bills on the one end. Now, we have been talking, Juan Carlos, quite a bit about the importance of an emergency basic income, because this is a crisis of supply and demand. So we have both to act on demand, and that is we have to protect the income of the poorest, and we need this emergency basic income. Many countries have done it, and I think this will need to be extended for the rest of the year, honestly, at least. And then for 3 months more, at least, or even more. And secondly, many countries have also given anti-hunger grants. And of course, a very important thing has been how to extend payment deadlines and grace periods for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, which of these 2.7 million enterprises, 2.6 belong to micro and small enterprises, and they are the ones who are being hurt the most. So the business sector is going to be hardly hit, and we will hear from them, I hope, because this is very important. So we do believe that in the case of the micro companies, there is a need to co-finance, in some cases, the payrolls to avert the destruction of capabilities. I think this is a very high risk on the supply side. If we don't face the productivity challenge that we have ahead of us and the demand challenge we have ahead of us, we have to look at the two at the same time, which is something that we never did before. And the support for big companies in strategic sectors. I think this is something that has to be seriously discussed. In Colombia, for example, Avianca has been asking for support. And I think it's important because these companies are strategic, they generate employment, they are connected to capital, they are also connected to innovation. So it's very important. Now, where to put our efforts in the future? I think it's so important to promote investments. First of all, on the infrastructure of life. I mean, infrastructure for life, we have discovered or rediscovered that is essential. So we have to invest in health. We have to make sure that this fragmentation of the health systems is avoided. But we also need to invest on water, sanitation, housing, and on sectors that are new, like renewable energy. I think renewable energy is a must in our region, which is doing more or less, but we need more. We really need more investment on renewable energy. We need to invest on connectivity. I think this is essential because coming back to the status quo is not viable. We really need to move into a different direction in terms of the development process. And that requires, I guess, industrial policies to increase productivity and have high quality jobs. I think this is something that we cannot postpone anymore. And I think one of the things we need to look into on top of these investments that I think are so important, this transition from fossil fuels to renewable energies is essential. And of course, private investment is essential. And that we believe, for example, in this region, just to put you an example, between 2005 and 2018, investments in the energy sector reached already $260 billion, 56 of which was still directed to fossil fuels. So we do need to have a different direction, a different mode. We understand, and you who come from the US as well, know very well that climate change is a fact. And we do need to move away from what's happening to us really very soon. So, and renewable energies, digital economies, public investment, public and private investment on basic needs like water, sanitation, I think are a couple of the things that I would like to leave on the table and see if we can really change this, I would say the building back better, really the recovery that should be a building back forward. I think Kristalina Georgieva using the building back forward rather than the building back better. And the World Economic Forum is talking about a full reset of the whole mindset and the way we do business. And finally, Juan Carlos, I just want to mention that we are in the week of the General Assembly, as you very well say. Today, we had the interventions of many of the heads of state of our region talking about renewal of the multilateralism, which I think is important. And I want just to focus on one thing that is going to happen on the 29th of September, and that is the financing for development. That is, how are we going to put money on the table? Because today, the countries of the region are doing a great effort, but never like Europe, 45, they are investing 45% of GDP. We are investing 5% of GDP. So there's a big gap. So where is the money going to come from? And how is the international community getting ready to put on the table, for example, special drawing rights to enhance liquidity, for example, or how are we going to get more from the international financial institutions, particularly to a region which is characterized by middle-income countries. Some of them don't need concessional funding. I mean, Colombia, Peru, Mexico don't need concessional funding. They have access to capital markets. But what about Central America? What about the Caribbean? They do. They do need concessional. We need to think about how do we bring resilience to this region, and how do we help in terms of that? So I think there is a rethinking about innovative instruments, for example, contingent instruments or the SDG bonds, like Mexico just participated in one of them, income-related bonds, hurricane bonds, diaspora bonds. So we really need to think out of the box to see how we are going to be able to create jobs. I think jobs is the main question, but how we do it sustainably and with equality. So Juan Carlos, let me stop here and tell you that in a nutshell, I hope.
No, thank you so much. I think you really gave a huge overview on what is going on the challenges, on what comes next. And I think that's very, very important. On that front, I would like to ask Madam President Arteaga on reforms, because a lot of what Alicia has said will have to imply somehow of streamlined processes in our countries, allowing our countries on one hand to have a more flexible labor market, or have a more sustainable pension system, or somehow even create tax incentives that allow different investments to happen effectively. Not to forget how to guarantee the social investment into our countries, specifically to those people in need. Very well described, more than 200 million people, 231, that are going to be in poverty. How do we fix or confront that? And well, you have been a president and you know how difficult it is to make reforms, but how do we convince Congresses and how do we move forward into that?
Thank you. Well, first I want to thank Juan Carlos and also Concordia for this invitation to be part of this panel. We hear Alicia making a kind of panoramic view about what's happening in the Americas, especially Latin America and the Caribbean. And I want to put some emphasis in some issues. I used to be a teacher. I started my career being a teacher, a high school teacher. And of course, I'm a lot concerned about education, how excluded are a lot of people about going to school, this kind of online school. If we know that in countries like my own country, Ecuador, we have almost 50% of the school population with zero connectivity. And it is dramatic because we are not thinking only in the present, but we are thinking in the future. If we don't pay attention to education, we are going to have no future at all. It's going to be a generation out of school. And Alicia mentioned about women exclusion, and we have a different kind of exclusion. In one side, we have the girls, the students, the school students, that they are out of school because parents decide many times to put the boys on the school. They continue the school, they make the effort on distant online school, but the girls are out. But the other big issue is that women workers, they have to choose between continue working or staying with the kids at home. It's not something that's shared with the fathers in most of the cases. There are exceptions, of course, but in many families, women are stopping to work because they have to stay at home. That's one issue that I want to focus and to call the attention of this panel and also to Concordia, because everybody is thinking about the health issue. Of course, we have to invest more in public health, especially in economic issue, but education is like in a third level, and I think that it has to be in a first level. That's one point. The other, answering kind of your question, I will put a lot more effort in the answers that the local authorities can give. We had the mayor of Miami at the beginning speaking about how important is Miami for Latin America, but I saw not only during this crisis of coronavirus, but also with climate change challenges, that local authorities are more in the possibility to give the right responses, having the possibility to be in contact more directly with the citizens, being like mayors or presidents of the councils or even governors can pay attention and probably make the solutions. When I saw the issue of education, I always go back to education, we can feel that, for example, about connectivity, it's much easier to get a solution for a city, like a Latin American city. How we can deal with that if we don't involve mayors, we don't involve municipalities to look and to search for solutions about connectivity, about devices, about different problematics that we have in the area. But also when we have to confront big challenges like climate change, we have to call again to the citizens. I know for sure there are a kind of initiatives about mayors of the different cities in Latin America that are fighting against climate change, and they are providing some kind of solutions. The other thing that I want to talk is about how we can face all the situations that we have. And I insist in the use of a kind of neologism in terms of language, but it's also a neologism in terms of approach, and to propose the global solutions, looking for the global. Of course, we are connected. We have financial systems. We have the climate change, that they are global challenges, but we have the local views. Then global is probably a better approach than only global and only local. This local means a new way to think about the problematic and how we answer the problems with solutions. Then global is one of my answers, the possibility to work with local authorities, and the other is don't forget to pay attention to education. And maybe another issue, mental health. Nobody's talking about mental health, but the wave of problems with mental health because of isolation, because uncertainty, because all the problems that are now facing humanity, it could be another wave of mental health problems. Then we have to pay attention, and probably we have to go back to education to work on how to deal with these situations. Those are the first answers that I have.
Thank you, Madam President. Very, very important points you made, you know, education, mental health, and of course, all these ideas on how to convince, you know, authorities to move forward into what needs to be done. I think that's very important. Let me get into another policy discussion that somehow the pandemic exacerbates. Venezuela has been a wonderful nation, has been one of the most wealthy countries in the world, but I think nobody has any doubt that has been, at least to say, poorly managed, not to say other things, which I'm not allowed and supposed to say today, but definitely is one of the few stories in world economy in which you have one of the wealthiest countries in the world, definitely in the region, and becomes one of the most somehow full of policy problems, poverty, violence, and lack of institutions. The consequence of that has been millions of migrants, of Venezuelan migrants, moving out of Venezuela. In my country, Colombia, I would say that at least 40 to 50% of those migrants have been, looking for opportunities. And to be fair, I think that has been a blessing for Colombia in the sense of, somehow a new workforce for the country. But of course, it has also consequences, not only in Colombia, but in many other countries in the region, implying challenges from social needs, from healthcare to education, of course, challenges in security, and not to forget that, of course, people need jobs and need programs. Definitely, Venezuela migrant problem is not a Colombian problem, US problem, UN problem. I would say it's a worldwide challenge, and especially for the region. And of course, we have David. David has been, fighting for his own country and doing the best he can to support his own people. But let's not forget that the pandemic has brought a revisiting to this challenge. And, how do we confront this? And how this pandemic is even deteriorating the condition of those migrants, just because, this is deteriorating every country, fiscal capabilities and challenges. What are you seeing, David? And what do you think should be done in the years to come with this challenge?
Thank you, Juan Carlos, and want to say thank you to all Concordia, especially Matthew Swift, for this invitation, and it's a real honor to be on this panel with so many great people, influenced people in the region. And I can say, Juan Carlos, that it's official since last week because of the United Nations report that the region officially has a country, which is Venezuela, that has a regime that is involved in crimes against humanity. And that goes beyond poorly managed. And that's probably the main cause why Venezuela has gone really bad on the economy, and especially why 5.1 million people have fled Venezuela as we speak. This is the largest refugee crisis in the history of Latin America and the Caribbean. We're the second largest population with refugees in the world, only behind Syria, that has been in a war for almost 10 years. But also you can say that Venezuelans are the population with most refugees without having a conventional war or a natural catastrophe. It has been a man-made disaster, and people are fleeing because of hunger, because of lack of medicine, lack of electricity, lack of water, general violence, and human rights violation. Just to give you a perspective on during this pandemic, and also this is according to the UN, 9.3 million Venezuelans right now in Venezuela are in starvation. So when you have 9.3 million people in starvation, plus 5.1 people that have fled the country, we're talking more than 14 million Venezuela are in a vulnerable situation, which is almost 50% of the population. So the consequences that we're having in Venezuela, that of course is affecting the region, is only similar to countries that has been in war. So when you have this crisis, 5.1 million people that have fled Venezuela, with almost 2 million, as you said, are in Colombia, approximately 500,000 are in Ecuador, approximately 500,000 are in Ecuador, approximately 500,000 are in Chile, almost 900,000 are in Peru, almost 300,000 are in Brazil, 150,000 Venezuela are in the Caribbean. This is a crisis that in the whole region with a global dimension. And when you have a pandemic that the one that we are facing, especially in this part of the world in the last 6 months, the refugees are vulnerable, but now becomes the vulnerable of the vulnerable. Because could you imagine refugee camps, for example, like the one you see in Brazil with this pandemic, the situation gets more complicated. And we're talking in a region that has 8 million people that have been with COVID-19 out of the 31 million. That's 1 out of 4 people that has COVID-19 are in Latin America. And 1 out of 3 people that die because of COVID-19 in the world are from Latin America and the Caribbean. So, of course, this is a huge challenge for the whole region, but especially for 5 million Venezuelans that are trying to survive. Just to give you a perspective, 5.1 Venezuelans, refugees, are bigger than the whole population of Costa Rica, than the whole population of Panama. It is almost the double of the population of Uruguay. It's more than the whole population of countries in Europe like Croatia or Ireland. So Venezuelans that have fled the country Venezuelans have fled its homeland, their homeland. It's a whole country outside. So of course the challenges are access to healthcare, which is, I have always to remind that this is a human right, and every Venezuelan should have a guarantee to access to healthcare, especially during pandemic. But I want to emphasize in something that maybe not many people think about it. I think it is as important as humanitarian aid, the regularization of Venezuelans. More than 50% of Venezuelans that have fled their country are not regular. And when you're having this recession in the region, I think this could create a huge opportunity to recover the economy. I think the region has a great opportunity to be more flexible on some migration policies, specifically providing the documentation to Venezuelans that they could get integrated on labor markets. And if they get integrated on labor markets, not only they will be benefited, but the countries will be benefited. And I just give two examples. For example, in Peru, just a few weeks ago, they applied a policy that has become they're more flexible now for all nurses and doctors, that they don't need their university degree to be part of the health system of Peru. So that was huge for Venezuelan doctors and nurses who are in Peru. Or what Colombia is doing, what in Spanish is Permiso Especial de Permanencia, PEP, and what they call the PEP Laboral, where if you have a job offer, even if you don't have documentation, you automatically get that permission to work. So I think this is very important. 66% of Venezuelans, migrants and refugees are unemployed or are working on an informal economy. And 2.5 million Venezuelans that out of the 5.1 that have fled don't have a passport, or have a passport that is about to expire. So definitely, if you provide the documentation and if there's more political will to have all these Venezuelans regulars, they could get integrated on labor markets. And if they get integrated on labor markets, I'm convinced that they could help quite a lot, especially in 2021, to recover the economy of the region. And just a last idea, I think the private sector could play a more active role integrating Venezuelans and providing opportunities. I have seen so many interesting stories about the private sector in Europe, for example, in Europe, providing opportunities for Syrian refugees in Germany, in the UK, and other countries. Something similar could be done in Latin America, especially that when you have, for example, you don't have, except from Brazil and some islands of the Caribbean, you don't have the challenge of the language. When you see Ecuador, Peru, Colombia, Argentina, Chile, Mexico, Costa Rica, Panama, we speak the same language as Venezuela. We speak Spanish. So I think also there is a great opportunity for the private sector and civil society to play a more active role to integrate Venezuelans, to eradicate human trafficking, to eradicate xenophobia, but specifically on the private sector, to implement policies that could integrate more Venezuelans to the labor markets. And at the end of the day, I have to say, the only way to solve this problem is restoring democracy and freedom in Venezuela. I can tell you, pandemic is very, very dangerous when we're having a dictatorship, because dictators becomes even worse. They use pandemic to be more aggressive on repression, to be more aggressive on social control. Venezuela now is completely isolated to the point that they are not even allowing humanitarian planes to Venezuelans to go back. People that had the opportunity to fly before COVID-19, it's been very difficult for them to go back because it's completely isolated. So for the region, the sooner Venezuela gets democracy, the better. And the best way to stop people fleeing, of course, is to having a Venezuela with freedom, with opportunities, with rule of law. Thank you.
David, gracias. Listening to the Venezuela story is heartbreaking. And I hope nobody else gets what has happened in Venezuela. But also I hope Venezuelans to get back what they deserve. And let's see how it goes. Luc, let me go to you a little bit on, and thinking a little bit on education, technology, capital. What should be governments doing right now? What should be the action from governments, but also from your perspective on the business environment? What can be enhanced in order to move on and somehow recover the economy?
Thank you, Juan Carlos. I think I'll take on the words of Alicia when she opened her remarks about the lack of capital and the need for private investment. And you and I, and probably most of the panel this year, we're lucky enough to be part of this global network where we talk about innovative finance and blended finance and impact and sustainable finance. But the region still suffers from this knowledge gap, right? I mean, universities are just starting to teach impact and sustainable finance, what the economist refers to as those wizards or those mixologists, right? Those people that have the ability in the region to actually build solutions to scale. I mean, they're hard to find. There's a couple of social bonds or a couple of impact bonds or pay for results in the region, but they're still extremely, extremely small, right? So there's a big knowledge gap to be filled. We finally have a network that was built out of this impact and sustainable finance faculty consortium. So we finally have a network in Latin America where we can hopefully with CEPAL, help close this knowledge gap, which I think is extremely important. I think on the other side, when it talks about policy, the governments in the region don't make any difference between funds. So when the funds enter, they will penalize them in the same fashion. So be it venture fund or vulture funds or impact and sustainable fund that are trying to help government close one of these gaps, right? Poverty gaps, ambiental, I'm thinking in Spanish now. So unless the government start adjusting their policy and saying, if you're coming here as investment, we're not going to penalize you, but we'll give you an incentive for impact and sustainable finance. If you can actually demonstrate that you're generating impact, around poverty, around education, around health, I think there's a lot of opportunities. And I think when you come to the ecosystem and capital, I mean, everybody's looking outside. There's a lot of capital right now and probably more liquidity than we thought before March. We thought the pandemic was going to put a strain on capital markets, but it's the opposite, right? There's more liquidity. A lot of people came out of these stock markets. A lot of funds are looking for place to invest, and emerging markets like Latin America are a great place to make investment. But again, you need this ecosystem working. You need to engage the banks and the pension fund in the region to go beyond what they've been doing in the traditional. Give you an example. I mean, in the region, we're building this $300 million fund with the Pacific region. So we finally united 4 states, right? 4 governments from the region, from the Pacific region to work together on a $300 million bond. This is where, step by step, we're going there. But what we found when it comes to investment, right? I mean, the banks are here and fintechs are here in the region, and this is the only alternative that SMEs have, or these MIPIMES, these small and micro businesses have in the region. So let's go to fintechs. But fintechs are banks without infrastructure, basically. I mean, they're not changing their models. They look at risk in the same way, maybe a little bit more open to risk than traditional bank, but they still look at it. And I'll link back to Richard here eventually. And I think what's interesting, what we found having discussion with some of these big businesses like Walmart here in the region, is when these fintechs lend one-on-one, not an ecosystem type of lending. When they lend one-on-one, the rate of approval is about 20%. So look at the SMEs as well, more or less their success rate is about 20% in lending. But when they look at an ecosystem type of lending, so lending through one of these, what we call anchor business or large business like Walmart, we did it with Cemex, a couple of other businesses here, then the lending rate or the success in lending goes up to 80%. So the risk is reduced by looking at the ecosystem, not one by one, because now, I mean, we're living in a world of uncertainty, right? So it's hard for a business to give you a business plan unless you're in health sectors. It's going to be bad for a long time. But if you look at a business, it's hard to make prediction for 1 year or 2 years or even 3 years. So if you look at the ecosystem, it's a much better approach to lending. So I think these are the opportunities right now that we have, is close that knowledge gap, right? So university, and hopefully with CEPA, we can promote this. Now we have a couple of countries. We don't need more, the sad situation that's happening in Argentina right now, where only 20% of people are working, 80% are, somewhat not officially working. So this put, an unsustainable way of doing finance, right? So I think there's a lot of opportunities in the region to change the way we do finance. There's a lot of capital and cheap capital. You can, Ecuador built a bond for social housing, $400 million, and with Goldman Sachs in a couple of days, very quickly. I think we have to go beyond these pilot projects. I think the region suffers from what I call chronic pilotitis, right? We always think, oh, well, let's do something, but, let's do a pilot project, $1 or $2 million, but the situation is bad. It's bad in the central. There's a lot of opportunities. You listen to the media, they talk about the last 2 decades and maybe the third decade lost for Latin America. But let's use this third decade to make it opportunities, but we have to change the models. We have to get government to change their policies around finance. I mean, we can't tax the same way you tax a vulture fund and an impact investment fund. I mean, it doesn't make sense, right? And when it comes to education, you have to close that knowledge gap and working like what Walmart has done recently with HSBC, created a $1 million bond focused on sustainability. So they said, we'll lend to you, we'll lend to our value chain, right? Globally, at lower rate, if you can show us, if you can demonstrate that you have a sustainable, or you have ESG principle, or GRI principle within your small business. So I think we need more of these Walmart, more of these good examples in the region, right? Companies that are saying, we know it's a business, and we're not asking for money. There's a lot of money on international market. Ford Foundation went to international market to raise capital to do more philanthropy, but not the same old philanthropy that we know. There's no Rockefeller in the region. So we need to change the model. And I think this is a great opportunity today to bring these discussions and to get to scale, because 2030 is approaching rapidly. So again, thank you, Juan Carlos, for this opportunity.
No, Luc, on the contrary, you're very right in the sense that definitely if we get capital, but if we don't get education, or the contrary, if we get education, but there's no capital to create jobs and to adapt to these new realities, we might be losing our opportunity, not to say we're losing our edge, especially to Asian economies, even to African economies that somehow are evolving onto this. So these gotta be a very regional challenge and somehow a commitment to move on to that. But I wanna jump a little bit to Nicolas Uribe, the head of the Chamber of Commerce in Bogota, because at the end, SMEs and the SMEs ecosystem somehow is critical. Small and medium enterprises are creating more jobs in Latin America than any other kind of company. But those companies are the ones that are being closed. Going back of my mind, I think that just in the case of Colombia, around 16,000 companies have been closed. Companies that, of course, are from 1 to 10 to 20 employees. But imagine the consequence for consumption, not to forget about poverty, life quality, education, and somehow livelihood of those families. I think that's very dramatic. So I know Nicolas has been thinking a lot on, first, what these companies are saying, and second, what do they need? Finally, I want to put here something that a business leader brought to me this weekend. And he's saying, look, definitely we need credit lines from governments. Definitely we need liquidity lines from something to provide ease monetary policy to governments. Maybe we need some government plans and activities. But one of them just told me, why don't we get some kind of insurance out of the government? Because we're losing our jobs and our companies because governments, somehow have this dramatic disaster, which is worldwide, the pandemics of COVID. So why don't we get our money back like, an insurance or a support? Well, those are thoughts that maybe Nicolas will open our eyes and let us know what is going on. Nicolas.
Thank you, Juan Carlos, and thank you very much, and a special greeting to all in this panel. Thank you to Concordia, of course, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here again in this Concordia Summit. First of all, companies need to make 100% of time operation. We have still in so many places quarantine where they cannot operate. And these partial restrictions, which in the name of health prevent the permanent activity of businessmen, are fueled more for ideological means rather than genuine interest to avoid health and pandemic outbreaks. So there is no credit, no idea, no project, no subsidy could supply and could be a substitute to an 100% operation activity of enterprises. So the very first thing that we really need right now is to open absolutely so people can work and sell and people can buy, which is one of the issues that maybe Alicia was mentioning before around the need of open not only the supply chains, but also the demand, which is in a way until today a little bit on a voluntary quarantine, because people are staying until today at home and they're not making decisions about spending and buying. And that, of course, is a perspective of the recovery. But in everything that we are doing and in the forums that we are attending and the surveys that we are reading these days, we have 5 or 4 points which are, in our point of view, very important, and they are always been in the environment, but in this case, I believe are very much in the same way of thinking of all small businesses. But before talking to that, I would like to say that in Colombia, for example, it is in the most countries all around the world, 97% of the companies are SMEs. So when we're talking about enterprises, we are talking absolutely of small enterprises, little companies, maybe are companies that give make an employment for its owner and a family member and maybe other 2 or 3 people. So when we think about employment, we love to talk and think about employment, we have to make decisions that basically care and basically protect enterprises, because we cannot love employment and hate the enterprises that make employment possible. So that's, I believe, the core of any kind of public policy action. It's to build a very strong defense of enterprises and to focus on their survival in these days. But if I would like to just mention a 4th or 3 things which are very important and that are in the middle of the concerns of the SMEs owners, I will say the next and the following. The first one is the financing. We have a great need of finance, and independently of the role that we believe that the banks have played in this crisis, I believe we are clear that it's been absolutely insufficient. And it doesn't matter if they're done well or bad, but it's insufficient right now. So we have to think of many other issues that we can use to finance little enterprises. And I don't know if we have a lot of capital, maybe we have, but what we lack right now, it's a lack, and we don't have any much appetite for risking money in enterprises. So we should work on that and make the lack of appetite in the risk issue for enterprises make a possibility for SMEs. And so we are thinking, for example, how can we therefore act on social factoring, for example, using an alternative, for example, creating a marketplace of social factoring, where electronic invoices can be used to give micro entrepreneurs access to finance without the institutional finance system. And that could be a possibility among others that we can use in this kind of situation. The second thing already mentioned by many of you, which is, of course, the need of technology and the use of technology in businesses. But it's not only about connectivity. Connectivity, it's of course essential, but it's not enough, because we have to make enterprises learn how to use connectivity and how to use technology to their own businesses. What does a pizza store, for example, in a neighborhood use or do with the connectivity if they don't know how to use it to connect with their new clients, or how to use it, for example, to find them because they don't know, they don't anymore come to their door. The third one, it's of course, company in reformulating the business plans of millions and hundreds of thousands of business plans of SMEs. They just not only need money, they need to understand the new client, the new consumer. They need to adjust their productivity issues. They need to change their way of work. They need to reduce cost. And that's not only because this is a difficult thing to do, but it's a massive necessity that we need to act, and to act very quickly, because the long term to SMEs today is not in 1 year or 1 year and a half, but until December, or maybe next 2 or 3 weeks. Because as Juan Carlos said before, we are having a real hard situation around small SMEs. In our accounts, in our numbers, we have 17% of enterprises that didn't recover from the COVID pandemic. And we have 63% more closed enterprises compared to what happened in 2019. So we're going to end the year when you sum the SMEs that were closed, the SMEs that didn't have any activity during this year, and the ones that they were never created compared to the year before, a number at around 100,000 SMEs that never created or died during the pandemic. And of course, there is one fourth thing that I would like to mention, Juan Carlos, which is the need of concrete actions to regain trust among consumers. This is not just about opening stores. It's not just about opening again businesses. As long as the demand remains in quarantine, we will not be able to see the reactivation. Businesses have applied biosecurity protocols. They have worked really hard to make changes that the new era and the reinvention make them to do. But we have learned during this month that with this kind of uncertainty, if today you can almost do anything if you take care of yourself, if you use mask, if you use social distancing, and if you use and operate with the proper precautions. So it's very important that we give the consumer the confidence to buy and to get back to the economic activity. It's not enough what we can do by the side of the businesses. We have to wait for signs of governments around that. We have to hear from health authorities around that. Not more and no more, stay home, don't go out, don't be in danger. We have to do everything that we can do to recover economic activity. And that means go out, and of course, take care of yourself with the indications that we already know that they work. So I believe these 4 or 3 issues are important, Juan Carlos, of what we're seeing in the local, the business point of view, and that we have all seen in the last service that we have done in the past few weeks.
Thank you, Nico. As you said, SMEs are somehow the net of our societies, and somehow every neighborhood, every street every corner will have some kind of a small business happening. And if we don't care for them, we will be in big trouble. This is why I think getting into Richard's point of view from Walmart, and I see Walmart as one of these big companies that somehow represent the connection between all value chains, from, getting all kind of producers and SMEs connected to your supply lines, to offering consumers low-cost access in a way they can really have many opportunities. But, how can we create this stronger net between government policies, small businesses, and businesses like Walmart that can really, push to the future and somehow help us to recover jobs and help us to move forward and adapt? Richard.
Thank you, Juan Carlos, and thank you to Concordia for setting up the session, and also to all the panelists. And Luc, thanks for your earlier comments on some of the work we do together. Alicia made a great overview of the economic challenges. There are probably three features of that I'd echo. One, the issues of inequality and the disproportionate impact that this crisis is having on the vulnerable people in society, low income and so on. The second one is informality. And the impact if you're in an informal sector, lockdowns hit you pretty hard. And then thirdly, just the nature of the local economies that are very exposed to tourism, to the oil business and to commodities, all of which are being very hard hit. So we talked about the kind of GDP impacts, unemployment impacts we're going to see. And in the end, private sector growth is going to be a massive factor in getting us out of this crisis. But to do that, we need real partnerships, both across the value chain and between government and private sector. Just to mention a few things, we've talked about stimulus, but actually, real focus on helping consumers and small businesses from governments is critical, and it's inconsistent across the region. I'd call out, stimulus packages in Mexico have been pretty absent. And so I think the kind of things you see, whether it's pension fund releases in Chile, whether it's, I think, Alicia, you mentioned co-funding small business employees, salaries would be a good example. Access to capital would be one. And then thinking about taxes, whether it's, payroll taxes, whether it's property taxes for small businesses to get them through what's going to be a short-term, hopefully, cash flow crisis. From our point of view, there's a critical issue around formalization. Probably the biggest area of investment that we have, and we invest about $1 billion just in Mexico and Central America a year, is in our discount format. And so when I talked about inclusive growth, that often is the first job for many Mexican Central Americans in the formal economy. Often it provides a ladder of opportunity. Most of our store managers started as hourly associates. More than 50% of our employees are females, and we've been talking about, Rosalía, you mentioned the lot of women. So it's inclusive development. Obviously, it's a job in an environment that is healthy and safe. It's inclusive development. But it's not just jobs. It also, as we grow, we bring more of our supply chain, small businesses into the formal economy. We set sustainable standards, compliance standards. And last but not least, actually, it expands the tax base, which is another issue for government. So we look for help actually getting that message across to governments in the region that actually that partnership in helping to create conditions for investment is absolutely critical. The other thing that we do a lot of work on that I've mentioned is just that conditions require really strong rule of law. And that's one area we've been working very hard on with the US Chambers of Commerce. And so as one example, we are making on the one hand a set of commitments that we want private sector to commit to, whether that's around board mandated compliance standards, training for employees. And on the other hand, asking governments to commit to create partnerships towards formalization, but also practical issues about getting development to the ground quickly. So in the crisis, technology's come up quite a bit. You think about licensing and permitting for projects with a lot of offices closed and with manual paper-based processes. Many of those processes at the local level have broken down and slowed down. So we're doing a lot of work around digitizing those processes. I think e-invoicing with Nicolas, you mentioned that. Another great example. We've got to speed up the process for us to get our investment to create the jobs rather than get caught up in paper-based bureaucracy. So I think in simple terms, that all the comments about getting financing in and education are critical. But probably the biggest barriers we see today is inconsistency of government action around stimulus. And I think, Alicia, to your point, I think it's going to need to be extended certainly through the end of this year. And then at the same time, working really hard to understand the role that we play in formalization and seeing that as a good thing for inclusive development, for expanding tax bases, for improving the rule of law and compliance. So a number of things, but I think we have to focus on both partnerships and practical steps that we can take, which is where things like the digital changes to processes, I think, can be most helpful.
I was supposed today to be the timekeeper, and I know I did not make a good job because I allow you, all of you, to talk. But frankly speaking, I think that our audience, and definitely myself, I've been learning a lot from every one of your remarks and comments. So I really want to thank you. And I guess we might have 1 minute for each to make your concluding remarks. But this time I will have to be tough to put in a way to, really keep that minute. So I will start with Alicia. What will be your concluding remarks to the future of Latin America economy, and how do we make this economy resilient for what comes next?
Well, I like very much what Richard said, and also what was said before about developing a new ecosystem for investment. I guess that to align the governmental efforts with the private sector needs, and basically, I think this idea of connecting the small and medium-sized enterprises with big companies like Walmart is doing, I think we have to focus on that. That's going to be essential. And now that everything is changed in a way, so I think developing a new ecosystem, promoting business, environmental, attractive to new investment activities. I am a believer of digital connectivity. We are suggesting a 1% investment to include these 40 million households. I think it's important because they are excluded now from education and from many things, from teleworking included. But there are other actions, activities, economic activities that cannot be done by digital economy. So, but I guess that these two ideas, I will definitely put them forward: a new ecosystem for investment, and definitely actions aligned with private sector, government with private sector, formalizing workers. And the social protection, I think this is important also. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Alicia. Very wonderful comment. Madam President Arteaga, please, your final remark.
Yeah, we will have to be very creative to know how to deal with all these challenges. And of course, public efforts has to be more in terms of education, public health, and how to create jobs, but jobs like in a framework, because it's a work that has to be done by private sector. Then give facilities and work for the inequality situation, how to improve the quality of life of people, working with the trying to get the support of all the citizens in each country. I know that it's very hard to do in Latin America, especially. I know what's happening in my own country that was in bad situation before the coronavirus, and now it's worse and worse and worse, and we are in an electoral process, and we don't know what's going to happen next year with the elections. But in any case, I know that people is decided to work hard, and then we have to use all this creativity, all the possibilities that we can get.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you so much. David.
Well, that even though the Venezuelan refugee crisis, as I said, is the largest in the history of Latin America and the Caribbean, let's not focus on the challenges, but on the opportunities. And the economy in the region has an opportunity to recover next year. And I am convinced that recovery also could go through integrating millions of Venezuelans on the labor markets, providing the documentation to be regular and to guarantee their rights on access to healthcare and education. As I said, that will not only benefit them, but it will benefit all the receiving countries in the region. And remember, don't take democracy and freedom for granted. Venezuela was one of the most probably important democracies in the region when I was a child, and everyone took democracy for granted. And the biggest lesson for us is that democracy was used to destroy democracy. For the whole international community and the region, help Venezuelans to stop the suffering, to stop people fleeing, to stop people having hunger. And the sooner we restore democracy in Venezuela, the better, not only for Venezuelans, but for the whole region. Thank you.
You're absolutely right, David. Absolutely right. Luc, your final comments.
Thank you, Juan Carlos. Three quick message to Alicia. Again, you're the voice of Latin America at the UN. I think we really need you to help us close this knowledge gap and help think in new models, right? This ecosystem type of lending. To Richard, a couple of years ago, we launched the Impact 2030 network with the UN, which is the largest coalition of private sector companies that mobilize human capital. So we need you in the region to speak to these private sector companies. So let's change the model. We need to think in new ways to do investment, not in the old traditional way. And my message to Nicolas in Bogota from Cali is let's all work together. I think, you know, there's chances and opportunities that there's a lot of capital in the world. I think we just need to build. We need these wizards and mixologists, and you guys are the experts. So again, very, very short, but again, I think it's a world of opportunity. Let's not make it the third decade of lost opportunities for Latin America.
Thank you, Luc. Wonderful. Wonderful comments. Wonderful comments. Nicolas, you want to have your final remarks?
Yes, Juan Carlos, there will be no recovery without SMEs. SMEs should be the mainstream of the recovery, and that's very important. The second thing is that formalization is very, very important in that. And it's not only important, but I mean, I believe the best opportunity that we have had in decades for going through that path. And inside that, women and youth, they are the ones that are suffering the most. So we should build programs to help them not to make this their lost decade. So that's very important for me as well.
Thank you, Nicolas. Richard, you want to end with your final remarks?
Sure. Just thank you to all of you. And I just really echo some of the things that Nicolas, Alicia has said. Our message to governments in the region is we want to be partners with you in helping to formalize the economy, to create inclusive growth, to help young people and women to get onto the employment ladder. That's our purpose. That's what a lot of our development and growth does with our Bodega format. And we just want to work with you to make that happen quickly. It's as simple as that in our view.
Well, thank you so much, Richard. For me, this has been a wonderful panel. Frankly speaking, I've been learning a lot. Every one of you have added something to the discussion. I think it's very impressive. From my side, I would say that first, we will need to have a strong support on the social safety net. We need to care for the poorest of the poor for two reasons. First, because it's the right thing to do, because we need people to keep, their basic needs satisfied and, care about. But second, because populists might be looking forward to build upon their needs. And we cannot allow that to happen in our region to even aggravate the problems we have. But on the other side, I think we gotta move to productivity efforts. And I think Alicia, but all of you somehow presented, and it implies investing in education strongly as President Arteaga mentioned. I think it implies to look to the next set of technologies like green technologies that Alicia described very well, or what Nicolas and Luc have presented strongly about the opportunity on digital technologies. And of course, what Richard has said about the general framework of how we make our economies more competitive, from rule of law to infrastructure that allow us to look to the next phase. And definitely I will end the strong message that David said to us. Let's not take democracy for granted. Democracy can be destroyed by democracy itself. So we better care and we better work together. I think this is a time in which private and public sectors, civil society, and social organizations, NGOs, need to join together to move our nations forward. If we continue in some of our countries to fight between, hopeful presidential candidates, between those that are trying to pull their interests for their own economic activities. Everybody going on their own. I think this recession is going to mark a major failure. But if we take this as an opportunity and we joined, as we are here today, different sectors, the UN, the politicians, the Chamber of Commerce, the OES, the businesses, the capital, companies, and we put together our efforts, I think we can create a better future and at least make this terrible pandemic a good opportunity for development. I want to thank Concordia for allowing us to be here. I'm really impressed on how they can, gather together people like you, and to all of those that are seeing us, thank you so much. I appreciate it, and I have enjoyed very much this strategic dialogue. See you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias.
Gracias.
Muchas gracias a todos.
Gracias. Take care.
Gracias. Adiós. Bye bye.
Gracias.
Adiós.
Adiós.
Thank you. Bye.
Adiós.